So tonight is effectively demystifying who Satan is and who the demons are, what they're about, their strengths, those kinds of things. If last week was about God's power, this week is effectively about theirs. So, and just to be clear, what I was feeling on this message was to specifically ask, what I was feeling was to talk to David, kind of like last week, how it was kind of conversation-based. This week it's similar. The difference being is I'm going to pose some questions, and I want you guys to respond, because the thing of it is one of the keystone elements of Christian life, being spiritual warfare. And one of the most integral parts of warfare is knowing your enemy. And nobody knows Satan. Nobody really knows a lot about demons. There are whole groups of Christians who believe that we're not even supposed to talk about this. It's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind kind of deal, where they believe that's how they'll stay safe. Which is so far from the truth that it's actually scary. Instead, they just become unwitting pawns in his little game. And just to clarify, the big thing with demons in general is they don't want to be known. They want you to know the image that they want to project, but they do not want you to know what they're really about, who they really are, how the limits of their power, those kinds of things. So the first question that I have is, who is Satan?
Just to get this out of the way, reiterating what you said and then moving on to this question here. I think Satan and the demons like to see what they can get away with at most, getting you to believe about them, and then they will take on whatever is most advantageous for them to embody as an avatar or something. And dispelling all of the grandiose, power and stuff. They do have power, but it's demystifying how much they really have, and then getting to the core of what they really are. They're powerless primarily when you probably just stop caring what they really are and just focus on what God is and who you are in God. And then God can just show you, if you need to see, what they really are. The Bible does not talk a lot about Satan or what he concretely really is. Mm-hmm. It's almost an abstract thing at sometimes where you have to kind of wonder, how much of it is just, he's just a spirit embodying each person at times, or, not embodying, but filling their hearts and sort of manifesting their darkest impulses and stuff. And in that moment, maybe Satan is kind of fusing with the person. And so it's kind of in a way, the person is sort of becoming Satan, like an adversary, in a way. Like when David, was tempted by Satan to number his army, when that was coming from pride or something like that. And then that's why God judged him in that case, and Israel, for going along with it. Right. So that's kind of how I perceive, in the first kind of impression, what I'm dealing with.
Right.
It's almost it's almost just part of the world in a way that is in the spirit, but it's part of the overall milieu, feel of just what we're swimming in this reality. It's just something that's always in the background, but you don't notice it. It's a static kind of thing.
Right. So in essence, Satan...
They don't want you to see them or notice them, but they're always kind of influencing things or trying to.
Right. Yeah. So yes and no.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. Part of tonight in the whole demystifying part is in order to draw out what's true and what's not.
Yeah.
Because we all have a lot of a lot of people, the church in general, as stated, they have a lot of very bizarre views of who this entity is.
You got to refine that and clear out the dross. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's the thing. But even the idea, so kind of this paradigm of Satan being a part of the world and this kind of omnipresent boogeyman that's just waiting in the wings for the opportunity to jump on your weakness. There is truth and lie to that. And the big thing about it is the truth of it is that there are usually demons that are functioning in that role. However, one thing that we have to remember is that there is a limited number of demons, and there's a limited number, and there's only one Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing about it is, like, even though when we talk about Satan specifically, like, this is a very powerful interdimensional being, there are a lot of things, a lot of constraints as far as the physical world that apply to us that don't apply to him.
Yeah.
However, he is still just a singular entity. And then there's a limited number of other entities that function alongside of him that he leads. And it's important for us to recognize that fact, that they are singular entities, and that they are limited by space and time.
And you think there's like a set number of them that will never increase or decrease or something like that?
There is a set number of them.
Interesting.
And we actually draw that from the scriptures.
Okay.
Where in Revelation it describes how, what was it, a third of the stars were swiped from heaven.
But
when
then
the
what
red
if
dragon
you
fell.
think about like how like stars in a sense, like in the natural sense, like space could go on infinitely and there could be an infinite number of stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a thing. However, we also know that God does not have an infinite number of angels. And even then, the problem with that idea
Yeah.
is it specifically says a third. You can't have a third of infinity. Because infinity is a concept. And see, that's actually one of like the elements of confusion that gets applied here. Because the exact number of demons is not known. But they also don't want that information out there, because if they were to find that out, it might be less than what we actually want. And we'll talk a lot about this particular element, specifically about guerrilla warfare and how that works next week, because there is like a substantial truth to the way that they work that's similar to that methodology, that strategy.
Yeah.
But the thing of it is that we have to recognize that their numbers are limited, and that there is a singular entity. And as far as Satan's concerned, him specifically, who is he? And we have to recognize another thing to kind of like tease out about him and them, is that one of the things with demons is that there are, I guess the best way to put it is that they have specialties. So one might be better, more adequately, and more functionally capable of working on somebody's depression, whereas another one might be better at working on their anxiety. And they do partition themselves off in these roles. It's why we can say that there is a spirit of fear or a spirit of rage on somebody. And even though that can be really esoteric in a sense, because it can also have multiple meanings, which can be a problem. But to say that there is a demon who is specifically pushing that button, and is specifically good at pushing that button, is not a wrong statement.
But there's probably some demons that have proficiency in all sorts of versatile, attributes, right?
Not really. I mean, there are some that are stronger than others, and have the capacity to go forward and push
What if
harder.
they could fuse like Legion or something,
Legion wasn't fused, it was a collection of different demons inside the same body. Spirits they're spirit beings, so they don't function in the same, like, spatially, they don't function the same way that we do. So you can squeeze in. It's kind of, Jesus references about how if you cast one out, then 7 more, I think it was, will return and replace it.
Yeah, if it's left empty.
Yeah, and that was the point, is
Yeah.
that those 7 can fit just as much as that 1 did. And that's the thing that we don't, another one of those kind of like keystone things to look at is, knowing what they can do. And as far as Satan is concerned, like even to specifically look at that question of who he is the leader of the demons. And another thing, like I think I've told everybody in the room right now the fact that Satan is not the strongest on that team.
What?
Yeah. So
On what team? What do you mean?
on out of all the demons and things like that, he is not the most powerful being in the sense that
Is he the most cunning or wise or something like that? In
He's
like
the
a
leader.
philosophical way, and so they all kind of, kowtow to him on some basis like that.
he's the leader. Like,
I got it.
he's not the strongest. I don't think he's the most intelligent,
Huh.
but he is. Maybe he is. But the point is that he isn't the most proficient at what they do. It's actually why one thing that, to be clear about, like Satan, is a lot of the time
He's just the head.
he is the head, but a lot of the time he's the one that'll come in after the fact. So one thing that I've personally experienced and also like known from just my time serving with the enemy
Yeah.
was that a lot of the time when Satan would show up, it was after the battle's already been won. When it's when that person is at their most broken down. It's even illustrated in Scripture as well, when it describes when Satan came to Jesus in the desert.
Yeah.
It was after Jesus had been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. He was hungry. He was tired. Like, it's just a rough state to be in. And it wasn't until he was at this broken state, that's when Satan showed up. And that's when Satan tried to tempt him, when he was at his most desperate.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about Satan is he doesn't like to be illustrated as being a villain. He prefers to look like a hero.
Yeah.
And that ends up being one of the most
Like
insidious...
Mephistopheles and Faust or something.
Yeah. Or more along the lines of, like, probably one of the most glaring
He
examples
likes
is
to look like a sympathetic character in relation to God, like you're supposed to pity the devil kind of thing.
right, like Prometheus in the Greek stories.
Yeah.
In fact, it's actually like the truth of his character. I remember
Prometheus was the character that gave fire to the humans or something, like he was kind of their advocate.
he stole it from the gods.
Yeah.
I remember reading out of a satanic Bible, and the kind of creation story that has been illustrated in that is that of Satan being like a Prometheus character, where he took magic from God and brought that to the world, to men, so that they could have that power. And as such, God punished him. It was a painful counterfeit to the Greek story, but at the same time, it was still what it was, and it put
Trying
it
to
in
give
this
humans a
sympathetic
sense
light.
of divinity without having to be in relation to God.
Right. The other part of it is that the reason why he comes at the later stages, like after the person has been pushed and prodded and beaten down, he can come as an accuser, but he usually comes as the tempter. He's the one that's going to seal the victory and draw you away from God once and for all. Because he's the one that's going to come and tell you, I can give you what you want. In essence, he tries to become your God in a lot of ways, by providing you the things that you oftentimes feel that you need in respect to just the suffering that you're enduring. If the other demons have come in and have just hammered you with depression and fear and anxiety, he's the one that will come in and provide you things that will help free you from depression, anxiety, and fear.
It's like kind of a fitting image where he's the Pied Piper or something like that, or also like a pawnbroker where, you sort of auction off your soul for an immediate payout, but it's only like a fraction of what it's really worth and what you could get out of it through serving God in the long term or something like that.
Yeah, sometimes.
And then like he has ways of like coercing you to stay hidden in the shadows, like
yeah.
out of shame, even if you wanted to convert or something like that back to God.
Yeah, no, that's a real thing. Because like the truth of it is that once he has you, once he has you in that place where you've agreed to follow him, he doesn't want you to go, and he will use guilt and shame as the key means.
He's possessive.
Yeah. Well, it's at the end of the day, one of his big purposes is to destroy what God is doing. Because at the end of the day, Satan isn't stupid. One of the big things to establish, and something that I hear all the time from preachers and just kind of like the really sugar-coated spiritual warfare sermons, is that they will occasionally try to refer to Satan as being stupid. And one thing to understand very clearly, this is not a stupid being. He doesn't have the illusion that he's going to win against God. Like he's going to come against him and win the day. But what he does have is a very clear way in which he wants to try to take as much away from God in his losing as he can. And that's where we come in.
It's just a war of atrophy.
Exactly. He wants to draw us away from him, away from God, and to lead us into places where we could even be completely turned against God.
Just do as much as he can to snub God during his progressive fall.
Yeah. Well, the other part of it is that we have to consider the fact that we are a direct reflection of God.
Yeah.
It's stated that he made us in his image. This is what he said when he created man, yes? Well, what is something that people, even in their bitterness, often do? When you have somebody who you hate, and you find a picture of them, what do you do to that picture? You deface it. In a similar way, a lot of what Satan is doing is he's trying to deface us, and then even further to make us his own. Or
it's like taking all of God's favorite things and like somehow ruining them all simultaneously in as many ways as he can.
Exactly. Taking God's favorite things and destroying them in front of him. It's a lot of how he functions. It's a lot of what he does. So, the other
and he
thing,
finds it really funny too, doesn't he?
Sometimes. Funny is an interesting word with Satan. Because in my personal interactions with him, there are two things that stood out to me. One thing was the temptation element and how he picks his moment. He is very cunning in this, that he will pick the opportune time to hand you what you desire most in order to have peace. Whatever peace looks like, he will offer you a version of peace. Now, if you think about it, even in the moment, you'll be able to figure out very quickly that this is short term. But the idea is to push you to the point where you're going to want to take that. That's part of his cunning. He knows how desperate we can be and how easy it is for us to lose sight of the world around us and to lose hope.
He hands you something comforting that's laced with something that's going to come back and bite you later.
Yeah, to an extent. That does happen a lot. And even just to clarify what I say with that, it happens a lot, is that every time this is true. However, we don't perceive that. So sometimes it'll just feel and taste so good and so sweet, but we won't recognize that the poison's something that takes years
Oh yeah,
take
there's
effect.
poisons that taste very good.
Yeah. But the other side of it is, as far as he's concerned, that temptation part, like, he wants to bring us to those places of hopelessness. First, that will happen, and then he'll provide us hope.
Mhm.
But the other side of it that I found in personal interactions with him was his pride. I have never, to this day, met a more prideful being. And I mean, like, you ever have those people that you run into where it's like a wall that you're hitting? I mean, their arrogance is so absorbing that they can't really see beyond it.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, in my personal dealings with Satan, especially the last time that I specifically talked to him,
Yeah.
because the last time that I talked to him, it was actually it was a couple years ago, and I asked God if I could, because I wanted to try to offer him the opportunity to stop the war, to just reconcile. And I wanted to talk to him about that specifically. And God said I could. So I was driving in the car, and suddenly I felt that old familiar presence that he has. And it's very, it is very unsettling, I guess. Like, you can feel it in the room. It'll raise the hair on the back
Like
of
it's
your neck.
enigmatic but sinister kind of.
Right. But, like, you can definitely feel it. But that was the point, was he came and we talked. And I offered him this opportunity, and he was so, like, resolved to not even budge, because he believed his pride was so strong and so impossibly thick that he refused to see the error in himself.
Mhm.
And he refused to see anything else. And there's no joy in him. That's why I say the funny thing is an interesting thing with him, because he doesn't delight in anything. It's just this empty void of continuously pushing to try to affirm himself in his motivations and in his actions, even the lies that he puts forward. It's that same deal as when somebody wants to believe that they're on the right side of the fight, that they're justified. That's where he sits constantly.
I mean, I think some people use humor as like a defense mechanism, where the less they're understood, the more they just start manically, finding it amusing that they're a mystery to everything, Like some people have that kind of sense of humor.
Yeah.
But were you going to say something like how, like, his pride is so palpable, yet he doesn't perceive it, but it's almost like a viscerally disgusting thing to encounter? Like he just exudes so much pride, and yet is oblivious to it. Like that he thinks he's so superior, and yet you can see what he can't.
So he exudes it, yes, but he doesn't. It's not the kind of thing where he does think of himself as superior. It's just that the way that it works with him is he believes his own thing. Like, he's so justified in his mind.
Yeah.
And he's right. Like, that's the big thing that he will project, is that he is correct in his action and God is wrong. And that's the thing that comes across so strongly or has come across so strongly in talking to him directly.
He always has like a deceptive, euphemistic way of framing it, where he's acting like he's trying to give God the benefit of the doubt, but just look at how terrible God's messed up everything, kind of thing. Like he puts it in a way like that, where
It's true.
it almost seems like God could be in the room listening to it, and yet Satan doesn't really give God a moment to look like he could, step in and defend himself, kind of thing. Like somehow he can kind of mesmerize people into just focusing on him and not God anymore, and then they start to actually think the way Satan does.
Right. And that is a big thing. Like when we talk about, okay, So to talk specifically about the power of the enemy, because this is a big thing, is that a lot of people do get caught up on this idea. They look at it in terms of how does he counteract God. And the thing of it is that there's no parallel at all as far as like the power that God has versus the power that Satan manifests. They are not one and the same. They're not even close.
Yeah.
But the thing with it is what Satan does do is he is an incredible liar and manipulator, and he is extremely charismatic.
Yeah.
And it comes, in a lot of ways, it does come as a direct result of where he'll put you, because this is a whole, like, game plan.
He is able to do things, at least in an illusional sense, that surpass even what we can imagine at times.
What do you mean?
I mean, like, that's how he can... But then God is far more, omnipotent and able to, be the real deal. But Satan's able to kind of present a counterfeit of almost being godlike or something. People that are willing to play along and entertain him in that.
So that therein lies like one of those deceptions, is what Satan is capable of doing, and what demons in general are capable of doing.
But it's almost like God's playing along at times and allowing people to be deceived to the extent that some people are, if that's what they really want, right?
No? So...
Because people sometimes, willingly suppress the truth in unrighteousness, and then they choose a lie over the truth, and then God sometimes is like, well, if that's what you really want, I'll let you believe whatever you want, and then we'll even send spirits that are deceiving to that person and allow them to be... That's what happens in the Bible a lot. I can show you instances of it.
I know the instances of it. It's something that I've had to look over a lot.
Yeah.
Because people project that image, at the end of the day, like that whole thing where Satan is trying to get people to turn against God. Well, what better place to look than the Bible and to say, well, look at who God is. He sent lying spirits to go deceive people. And the thing of it is that it becomes that kind of thing where we're projected a truth, and then we're given the evidence. And without interpretation, it looks exactly like what it looks like. It's kind of like somebody eating a chocolate pudding fruit, right? There's a black sapote is a type of fruit from South America or Asia, I don't quite remember. But it's called chocolate pudding fruit. It looks like chocolate pudding when you cut it open. It apparently tastes nothing like chocolate pudding. However, because it's called that, a lot of people perceive that it tastes like chocolate pudding. They look for that flavor, or at least a similar flavor, because they're already attuned to believe that that is what it's supposed to be. So even in the instances where God has sent, could it not also be that he allowed?
Yeah.
And that ends up being the specific difference. And because we're tuned already to believe it's one way, it makes it harder for us to see what was actually happening. When God says, go then, that's just a general statement. So, again, back to the point of like what they can do, that is hugely what they can do. Twist and manipulate words and understanding. And they're able to go further than a lot of people can. Because the thing is that they're able to go into places of directly affecting how we think, and even working within the realm of that and laying out all these seeds so that they can have us already prepped and attuned to believe something that they're going to use later. So
It's like if you look at how dreams can be profound, like they can probably do things in your mind like on some deep level that affect you that you can't even perceive.
Sure. Like that is a thing. And the truth is that people are actually able to emulate a lot of the things that they do. And I say that both because I've seen things and also because I've done things. And when I talk about even the things that I was taught specifically, the manipulation, the lies, those kinds of things, I wasn't taught to I was taught to both manifest and like what could be done, and then also use what was already there. And the biggest thing was it was all in order to push people in a direction.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far into that because that's more of like what next week's about.
And I already know what you're talking about.
Right. But the part of it to look at is just this reality of how strong a lie can be. And oftentimes we misinterpret or misunderstand how truly significant lie and how powerful lies can be.
Yeah.
How much what we believe can affect us and destroy us, and that is the thing that they use. It's really twisted in a way because what they do, what they have done, is they know they know what it means to believe in something. They know God, they know who He is, and they know how much power is in belief, because that's the thing that God calls in us. And as such, they found ways to take us to places of believing things so wholeheartedly that it makes it almost impossible for us to see past this lie that they have put up and projected. As for the actual, like, the powers that they have beyond those things, like, depending on the situation, and there is variability here, they can, like, affect the physical realm to an extent. They can touch people, they can push people, they can do things like that. They can even hurt people at times. But of course that comes down to, in a lot of ways, relation to God ends up being a thing that determines their capacity.
They can do all sorts of supernatural things if God allows them to.
Not necessarily, like, one of the big things to establish here is that freedom piece. Like, just to clarify a lot of the misinformation here, is that God has given us freedom. Okay? So even to say that...
Brought my child.
Okay.
How do you know it's coming?
What?
We always meet
You
here.
guys always here?
Yeah.
Nice.
So, even in the sense of, whatchamacallit. So as far as God's concerned, He has given us freedom, correct? I got thrown off for a moment.
Not necessarily like a right, but, still like a freedom to choose the wrong if we so choose kind of deal.
Exactly. It's just freedom, plain and simply.
Right.
We have the freedom to choose our paths. We have the freedom to choose what we believe in. We have the freedom to love, to hate, to do all these different things. We have a level of complete freedom in who we are going to be and how we're going to act, and God grants that because, as described last week, love and freedom are intertwined. You can't love somebody without the freedom to determine that you love them. And therefore, as far as God's concerned, He's given us this freedom, this absolute freedom to determine whether we want to love Him or not.
Yeah.
And we even see an illustration of that in, like, the book of Job, when Satan comes and, throws out his thing against God there, where he's just like, well, He only loves you because of all the things that you've done for Him. If you take those things away, then He'll turn on you. So it's in that realm that He utilizes that freedom to work it against us. And it's not that God is specifically saying, well, I'm specifically just going to let this happen. It's that He's allowed that freedom, period. And a lot of us don't understand that. A lot of us don't take that for what it is. So it becomes this kind of issue of saying, well, God made this happen. And that's something that Satan and his demons are extremely proficient in using.
Are you trying to say that, like, things like Job happen way more than we think, and it's
Yes.
like, just as often as it doesn't happen, it's sort of just Satan being like, it's not even worth my time kind of deal?
It's more so saying that things like what happened with Job, they do happen a lot as far as, like, that paradigm, and even the story of Job and what came out of it. So in the story of Job, we see him lose everything. God grants Satan the freedom to do what he wants to do, and he puts Job through so much hell. But the thing of it is that even with the story of Job, what ends up happening is that, yeah, Job does actually like what surfaces in the process of all that pain and suffering is that there was a part of his heart that still that actually worshipped the things that he'd been given.
Yeah.
And that's when God showed up and addressed that.
There are a lot of lengthy passages where Job is like reminiscing about, oh, I loved all the days when people looked up to me and were like sitting at my feet in awe and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Those days are gone, but I miss them, and you know.
Which were the exact things that Jesus highlighted about the Pharisees that were wrong in
Yeah.
Matthew 24.
Right.
So that ends up being this big thing. And again, like the enemy is extremely proficient in using that against us. Because he wants to put you in a place where you're going to stand up and point at God and say, yeah, you took this away from me. You did this. You put me in this place. When in reality, it comes from that freedom that we all have. And the interesting thing about the story of Job is I think it's kind of like a side tangent, but just to be specific, if I think there's one kind of paradigm to the story of Job that we miss, it's the story that God can turn anything into being for his good. Because even pulling that, even though Job went through so much bad, what was highlighted and what was able to be redeemed was Job.
Yeah. And he got to actually encounter the potential within himself that manifested because of that circumstance, and he wouldn't have known it otherwise, and maybe he would have been more in control and understanding his own inner nature after that, a better person.
Yeah.
Even after, God supposedly, returned as much of what he'd had as possible after the fact. Like, maybe he looked back on it afterward, like, and was glad it happened in the end, the way God,
Yeah.
somehow allowed it to be sublimated in the end.
Yeah.
At least it seemed in the end like he was content.
Yeah. So I think in the end of it, what demons, the greatest power that demons and even Satan specifically have is their ability to observe and use anything that they can for an advantage, that cunning that they have, and also to create opportunities for themselves to utilize that. So even creating circumstances where they're going to use your rage against you, for example.
Sure.
Or your depression. And I keep using those because they're some of the most consistent in general.
Anger and sexuality are a couple of the most volatile parts of the human psyche to really know how to express in a positive way.
Yeah. But even with that,
Yeah.
identity ends up being another big thing. And so again, like I said, we'll come back to that again and again. Because one of their main fronts of attacking is our identity. It's going to be who you are that they try to use against you. And they're going to attack that to bring you down to where you're the kind of person who can be depressed, who can be riddled with anxiety, who should be afraid. And they're going to use those things and project them forward with you. But as far as beyond that, the powers that they have are extremely limited. Again, it comes back down to the things that we believe they can do. So even the idea of possession, for example. Possession is something that we see in the Bible, it's something that we see in real life, it's something that happens periodically. So demons will possess people, but oftentimes what that relates to is whether or not they accept that as a possibility, if they even believe that they're safe. Because there's a place where one of the truths of being a Christian, it makes it very hard. They can't possess people who have the Holy Spirit. Because the thing with the Holy Spirit, and understanding very clearly that when I say that, these are people who have truly received, not people who have said the sinner's prayer, because those are not always the same thing.
So you think like someone who's filled with the Holy Spirit wouldn't even have the inclination to seek out to be defiled by a spirit in the sense that it would actually possess them?
No. What I mean is that people who have the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
there's a spirit already existing in them.
Oh,
And there's no room for demons to be involved in that.
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's literally just that much.
But they'll still mess with you.
They'll still mess with you, absolutely.
Yeah. Or convince you that you're possessed, maybe, or something.
They can try that. And just so you guys know, like, walking into this is what we're talking about tonight. Like,
Yeah.
demons, Satan specifically, and even just kind of getting rid of some of the lies that people believe in. Because it is, like, it's a normal thing, it's a common thing, and there's a lot of bull crap that people accept as true.
Remember my mom's house?
Oh yeah,
Shit
his
used to
mom's
mess
house
with me.
has like something in it, and like
Mm.
stuff will like fall. And one time we were
Like
like
grab you.
sitting on, yeah, it will like grab you and stuff.
Mhm.
But like one time that there was this, we're sitting in the living room, and literally like in the next room where all of the china
The
hut
dining
is,
room.
yeah, the dining room, everything flipped over at one time.
Mhm.
Every
Oh, yeah.
single thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One time it grabbed me, but it
all
felt
the-
good
all
because
the
it was
cups
massage.
just flipped
So, like,
over.
massage was like, go
It's like
ahead.
some
Look
poltergeist, just look what I can do.
Yeah, they'll still mess with you, but
Yeah. I'm not,
Texting is good.
and that ends up being like one of those big things. Again, they can affect the physical world.
Mhm.
They can affect us physically in that sense. But the limitations that come with that are the places where how much belief we have in their ability to hurt us.
oh yeah.
So, even as an example,
They use intimidation most of the time.
yes, that's the bulk of what it is. Again, it all comes back to lying and just the power that deceit has to make us believe things that aren't true.
Sometimes the best they can do is just to try and distract you momentarily,
Mhm.
or get you to drift from what you should be focusing on.
Right. So, as an example, I remember this story about a particularly powerful warlock,
Mm.
and he ended up being torn apart by demons. Now, this is not something that can be done for a Christian, squarely because we understand that they can't do that, if this makes sense. It's a weird thing, but to make sense of it, just in the same way that a little bit of faith can move a mountain, a little bit of faith can also get us killed. It depends on where that faith is placed. If we have faith in the enemy that they can do these things, we effectively grant them license. And that's something that a lot of those intimidation tactics, those games that they play, all that stuff is to get us to believe in them.
And there's like also like how Satan has crept into like the Catholic Church in ways and teach the people like you need the exorcists who are the only people who can do this or that. Otherwise, they're going to tear you apart, kind of thing.
Right. That is like
And then a lot of people believe it.
Yeah. When the truth of the matter is that we've all been given that same power to exercise, to remove the enemy, all that stuff. So, as it pertains to their power, their greatest power is to lie. Again, like, I've heard people get caught up in ideas of can Satan create things, can he do this, can he do that? No.
He can make it look like he can.
That's, again, back
If
to
you give them
lying.
power too.
Yeah.
I think they do have like powers of apportation, like where they can teleport things from one place to another and make it look like it just came out of nowhere and things like that. I believe that.
Let's...
It's anecdotal, but I think people have seen it.
Yeah.
It's been undeniably like at least documented to appear a certain way.
Again, like where we have our faith in them, those are the things that they can use and really affect us because of the power of the lies that we believe.
They
is
can
going
also
to be
make
the
people
strongest thing.
hallucinate and think they're seeing things that aren't really happening and
Yeah.
whatnot.
And that's one thing that we actually talked about the other day, was just this point about how one thing that they can do is they can project images into your mind.
Yeah.
it's where a lot of people come up with those things where they don't, suddenly they're thinking like the most terrible things. The kinds of things that they would never think of, and they're just like, holy crap, you know, am I going crazy? What is wrong with me? How no sane person thinks like that or wants to do that or whatever.
Yeah.
But we also have to be aware that if it's not something that we would do, it's probably not us. And that's a big deal. And that's a big place to look at and take some refuge in.
Sure. But then there are also a lot of people who hide from the reality that they are capable of some monstrous things. And then when it creeps up on them, sometimes that really is potential within them that they're just denying. And if they were to face it and actually acknowledge it, then they would be in more of a place of control and not, you know, at least having it happen
Evil.
unexpectedly kind of thing.
Evil comes from one place, though.
He's right. Like, even just to like be square with that, to respond to that. If somebody doesn't believe that they're capable of something, see, in general, we're not really made to be monsters. Like, that's not how we were made. It's not even in our psyche. As an example, and we'll talk about this a little bit more next week, but one example is that a study was done on new recruits in the military, fresh out of boot camp, and sent straight into war.
Yep.
They noticed
High?
they aimed high, exactly.
That to be trained to shoot at the enemy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because our subconscious is to not want to hurt them. Like, they wanted to scare them off,
Yeah.
not kill them. And the thing of it is like, a lot of the people who are comfortable doing those kinds of things are already there, and they know what they're capable of. And that therein lies that thing, is that this whole thing, this work that they do, this power that they have, is to twist perception, to lie, and to get us to believe in these lies. So even in that place where somebody's like, somebody believes that somebody's capable of something, the idea of somebody being capable of something horrendous, but lying about it to themselves, don't you think that maybe there's a head game being played there that maybe isn't just them?
I think there's like a sense in which you can take a person who is a pure person, but things can go on with the body that isn't really them. Like, say you're an old person that was a saint, but now you've got dementia, and you know, maybe demons can speak through your body because you're just totally out of your mind and so old and decrepit now that you're demented, but it's not like morally your fault. Just like how children can be demon possessed sometimes before they even know good and evil.
Yeah. And that's actually another thing, like mental illness
Yeah,
and the effects of mental illness.
yeah.
That's a different paradigm.
But that is one thing to take stock of. Like, sometimes you could be totally sleep deprived and you're not yourself. And just to know that you can get to that
Yeah.
is something that just that knowledge sort of hedges you against that danger a little bit.
More vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the point, was like,
That's the point I was trying to make.
I see. And even in those places, like, as we've established, like, even with the example with Jesus from earlier, like, we know that they utilize that stuff.
And it's like, you know, when Jesus was saying sometimes the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak, like his disciples couldn't stay awake 1 hour with him at the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah. And even in those places, like, the enemy will use that stuff, but again, it's still being used, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a place for us to be with God in that. Again, their great power is observing and creating opportunities and advantages that they can use to twist and get people to believe lies. That is their great power.
And then try to get people to despair over a lost battle in that kind of a situation, rather than just continue on with the war and win.
Mm-hmm. Again, lies.
Yeah.
Like, it really is that simple. And like I keep trying to do this, but we'll talk more about like the strategic element next week.
Mhm.
But right, because this week was really hopefully more to just establish what they can do,
Yeah.
and the most powerful thing they can do is lie,
Hmm.
and they're good at it. They're so good at it, and that's the point. So, another thing was what we talked about last week, like Stephanie brought it up, which was the part about Satan being the king of the air.
Mhm.
And since that one got brought up, we'll reiterate it, because it is an important part. But the question's gone now. Originally the question was going to be, what does it mean for him to be the king of the air? It's just a term. And there's no place in the Bible that says that God gave him license to be anything. God created the world, but he didn't give the world to Satan, he gave the world to us. So, and that was out of Genesis.
We also, there's people who speculate that God created him to be the tempter and stuff like that, and then other people that believe that he just fell on his own and chose to become that.
Yeah.
It's like almost a philosophy that's just theological, and
Yeah, but
people have to speculate.
that's another one of those things again, though,
We're not
right?
told.
Where, so if the idea of God creating Satan to be the tempter, that creates a paradigm where we can't entirely trust God because he's going to create situations in which we can fail. At which point it stops being about whether or not he wants us to succeed and wants to draw us, but it's almost like he's throwing this hurdle in our way to try to destroy us. And especially when he creates a situation that says, well, if you follow him, you die. So it kind of creates this this scenario where we have to not entirely trust him. And that again is another one of those lies that have been created and manifested and built and pushed forward. So it is exactly that.
There are a lot of different interpretations that you can just come up with on your own to perceive the purpose and motives of reality.
Yeah. And that's actually a big part, though, in all of this. Even part of, the reason for why this message is what it is, and this time is what it is. Establishing, what's true. Because there are a lot of these things. Satan was not created to be the tempter. He chose that. When he fell, and even when I was talking about, the truth of my experiences with him, and just how strong his pride is, how justified he is, this is something that he's doing on his own. This is his own war that he's created, taking the angels that came with him and effectively using them as the demons that they are now to try to lead us astray and to break us down in order to try to cause destruction in what is God's creation. Because he'll use whatever lies he can. He wasn't created for this. The world wasn't created to be what it is. God
at times can repurpose a thing in a situation if it suits him or something.
He can, but he didn't repurpose Satan to tempt Eve in the garden. The garden was created to be perfect. His place with us, his children, created in his image. I thought it was funny because earlier I heard a guy at random make this statement, and it was so simple, but it was so profoundly straightforward. God wouldn't create something imperfect.
There is like a Gnostic kind of lie spin on that, where they have Jesus saying God could have created man without foreskin if he didn't want him to have it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah.
But it's not as fun. I mean, then there's.
But there was some purpose in it, where that was
back in the days they didn't
symbolic
have
thing.
video games, so I mean, what were the family supposed to do together? There's no board games either. It's called Operation.
Yeah. So I guess the last question is what do you personally believe pertaining to Satan and the demons as far as what they can affect you, or how they can affect you and what they can do? And this ends up being a big question that we all need to ask ourselves, because it will, in a lot of ways, it determines our interactions. And it's not something that I'm asking specifically for everybody to answer now, because I'm about to wrap up the tape, and we'll talk about it. But we need to understand that the answer to that question actually affects our ability to function in what is the kind of continuous state of spiritual warfare that we exist in. If you believe that Satan is more powerful than the Holy Spirit that God has put into you, you will be crushed by him over and over and over again. Not because God is weak, but because your ability to even call on him is. When one of those powerhouse demons shows up, who can, withstand you casting him out in Jesus'
It's like
name.
how there's the fight, flight, or freeze responses. And,
Right. When one of those demons shows up and he can weather that, are you going to jump to the conclusion that, oh, well, God's abandoned me because I'm not actually good enough for him? Are you going to jump to the conclusion that, God's weak? Are you going to jump to the conclusion, and those beliefs, like that idea, for example, that Satan was created to be the tempter, again, that creates an atmosphere where you can't trust God anymore. On a subconscious level, that's where it's going to take you.
almost like maybe you're like of the mind where it's like, if I was God, I would do that kind of thing. Like some people will just go with it.
Yeah, and that's, again, like a dangerous place to be, because we spent last week talking about God.
People just treat reality like it's a game.
And we talked about it the week before, because we have to understand that God is his own person and being. He has his own will and activity and his own way of doing things, and that is not our way. Like, a lot of us are crafted by the world in response to it. I mean, we've all been hurt. We all carry elements of bitterness, delusions, lies that we believe in. We all carry things, ways that we think the world would be better that may or may not be best for everybody, but it would certainly be best for us specifically.
It's your own little utopian dream that's a nightmare for everybody else.
Exactly. I mean, how many different people have I heard pitch the idea that we need to ship all the stupid people off to the moon?
Euthanasia.
Yeah, exactly.
Euthanasia?
We're going to use euthanasia to change the world and make it a better place.
But then euthanasia's gonna suck.
Yeah, but half of those
That's what
people...
Hitler fed the Germans. He's like, yeah, the Aryan master race are going to come in and take over, but we're going to get to be the privileged, underclass.
Right. But even half the people that I've had pitch the idea of euthanasia to save the world from stupid people were themselves stupid people. It was one of those things where it's just like,
You didn't want to answer it. You just
I just ignored it. It was just like, okay. You really don't see that you're the same. Okay.
That's fine.
I'm perfect. I'm totally kidding.
Yeah.
I had to add that for humor.
That's funny.
But that's that thing, is we have to be able to draw the line and establish who God is, especially when we're looking at the enemy, who, if we're honest, looking at even just to clarify what we've established here about him, okay? He's a liar. His greatest power is to lie to us and get us to believe in him. And that's it. That's basically it. Satan, the demon. Satan's not even the strongest demon. But we like to believe he is.
He's a leader.
He is the leader. So establishing just those few facts, it really kind of makes the whole thing a lot less dangerous.
That'll be
He's
funny
a
if
marketing master.
That'll be funny
Yes.
if he's like the Yoda,
Yeah.
You expect him to be like, it's just like this Yoda.
Yeah.
He's like kind of like the ninja that hides in the shadows or something, just there at the opportune moment to snipe something.
Yeah. And that's not to take away from
Strategist.
how good he is at what he does, but it is to minimalize and marginalize and look at what things really are. Satan has a box that he fits into because he doesn't have a choice.
He's a manipulator.
And therein lies the thing where we have to look at this for what it is. So knowing who God is, knowing who Satan is, knowing who the demons are, and what they're about, what they represent, what they can do, how much they can't actually do. The more we believe in them, the more power we give them. And in a lot of ways, it is that same deal where we manifest the things that we believe in, for lack of a better word for it. There is a psychological term that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's where you project the reality that you believe. It's almost like a lot of people with anxiety or depression do it, where something is difficult, or maybe it's not even difficult, but because of the concern that it's going to be difficult, it paralyzes them.
There's a sense in which people perceive reality on,
I'm just going to finish.
Yes.
So they end up doing that thing where, because it's difficult, they'll paralyze themselves and be stuck. And they won't be able to do it. They won't be able to step forward or do anything because they're so paralyzed by the possibility of this being what it is. And as such, they make it impossible. They believed it was impossible to begin with. Now paralyzed, they make it impossible for themselves. Not because it actually is, it's just a simple matter of making a phone call. Or hopping in the car and driving to a place. But because their belief is so strong in this, it does make it real. And then when they have to talk about it, they have to explain that this is what real life is.
Have you ever seen the paper tiger analogy? Where you have an image of something that looks terrifying, but really it's just paper thin. You could walk right through it.
Right.
And so you get a phobia of it because in your imagination it's something really that, like, there is some substance underlying it that's terrifying, but it's not real. And that's just the illusion.
Yeah. And that's fairly accurate to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, the enemy is that paper tiger.
Like the Wizard of Oz kind of do.
And where the Holy Spirit has empowered us and imbued us, like, we're given the same power that Jesus had, the same ability to overcome, through in all the ways that he illustrated. If we have the Holy Spirit, we have that same level of power, whether we believe in that or not. But if we don't believe in it, we won't access it. And that's probably the biggest thing. Whereas if we believe in the enemy, we will access that fear. We will allow those places to be touched, to be hurt, to affect. So again, that question of who do you believe? What do you specifically believe about Satan and the demons? That's something that we all need to think about and address with ourselves, and especially with God, because that will affect our ability to not get rickrolled by them over and over and over again.